I call to order the October 6, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting of the Board of Education. We welcome everyone and request everyone in the audience to please silence your cell phones and electronic devices. Mr. Lindy, please lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Bates. Bolton. Present. Mrs. Bowers. Mr. Lindy.
Here.
Mr. Messer.
Present.
Morosky.
Here.
President Jones.
Is here. Thank you. So this evening we have three very straightforward presentations. And Superintendent Ahmad, please introduce our first presentation.
It is a pleasure to introduce Shawn Fisher-Jackson. She was here 2 months ago, and she is here to present a CPP update. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As you all know, September is our very popular month. Not only are we getting in the swing of preschool, but it is the time for our annual meeting at the Preschool Promise. We issued our annual report 2 weeks ago, and we hope that you all have the printed copy of those. And last week, we were also fortunate enough to issue our Year 4 evaluation that was conducted by Innovations. It is reflective of not only the data and the outputs, but the overall organizational effectiveness, our operations, our impact. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Kalana Hinder, who is joining us virtually, to share some highlights of that Year 4 evaluation. After she does that, I will talk a little bit about the annual report and also highlight some key metrics in that and kind of next steps of what we'll be doing to set goals for the year going forward.
All right, thank you so much, Tara. I don't know if we have my slides lined up. Next slide, please. I believe a slide after this. My slides may be a part of a different slide deck from Innovation.
I think you also have a printed copy of the slide deck that she sent in advance as well.
Is there a way that I could share?
Yeah, if you can hear me, you can share your screen. There's a little icon third down on your right. Click share screen.
Okay, let me try that.
Okay.
And I think you also have a printed copy as well of the slides that Dr. Hinder is going to share. So.
All right, can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, so.
Do we need to talk about that?
All right. Hi. All right, so I'm going to start by talking about early literacy readiness. And hopefully you can hear me clearly. I'm getting a good amount of feedback on my end.
We can hear you.
Great. All right, so what we did, usually this would be the slide where we talked about the kindergarten readiness assessment. Obviously, the district issued the Cadence reading assessment this year, so we're talking about this performance. And what we did was compare two cohorts, one that contained kindergartners who had attended TA preschool the year before. We compared them to a cohort of kindergartners who had no documented preschool experience. So when we looked at overall differences in terms of kids who were performing at or above the benchmark, we found that the CPP cohort was at 51.4% versus the non-CPP cohort, which was only 50.1%. So we saw a slight difference overall. We also looked at differences by race and by social economic status. And when we looked at Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students, we found that the CPP cohort, again, outperformed that non-CPP cohort. And those magnitudes were 9.5, 8.2, and 15.1%. And when we looked at performance within SES quartiles, we found that a stark difference, especially in SES1, which I think is meaningful because these would be the students with the most need. There was a 23.4% difference in performance at or above the benchmark for those SES1 students who had attended CPP preschool the year before. And something new this year we did was take a look at the progress that preschoolers were making as they were actually in preschool. So we looked at ELA and TS Gold scores. We did that because they have many similar domains and are pretty widely available at many community CPS and Head Start providers. So we are presenting some data from 2019-20. We're presenting that this year because that data wasn't available to us last year for that report. And it's always nice just to have more data points to consider. So for both years, we saw that preschoolers at TA sites made progress from fall to spring in 4 domains. And those domains were the same both years. One thing we wanted to understand, a couple different things this year, to try to understand a social-emotional measure of coping, especially given all the disruption with COVID. Then we also wanted to look at some measures of physical development. So we were glad to see progress in those domains. The last thing I want to touch on is just some of the impact that CPP has made in the community amongst the community stakeholders. In terms of satisfaction with CPP communication, we surveyed parents, teachers, and providers across 4 different modalities, and the responses were very positive. So either very satisfied or satisfied with communication. Most of the responses were in the high 80% or the 90 percentile range. We also wanted to understand TA parent satisfaction with their CPP experience. And we asked questions in 4 areas here. And as you can see, again, a very high rate of satisfaction amongst that community TA population, with preschool center options, tuition assistance itself, and all of these factors. So we have much more, like Shar mentioned, across the 3 reports that we submitted, but we're trying to keep it concise today. So here are some of the recommendations and next steps that apply to what I presented today. One thing is to continue to support providers during this uncertainty. This time it's through the COVID-19. There are sure to be other disruptions that happen in the system. CPP has been very responsive, and that is something that providers told us was very important to them. Also, to consider kindergarten readiness to include the whole child. Like I mentioned, we started looking at some different measures of readiness this year. We know that children have to be ready for the kindergarten experience, not just with academic readiness, but emotional as well. And then also to extend learning to prevent learning loss. Again, we had this immediate disruption due to COVID, but we have data that shows the more days that children can attend high quality preschool and the more continuity that children have with that in-class high quality experience just leads to better outcomes as they reach kindergarten. So that is all I have. Are there any questions?
Board members have questions or comments? Mr. Messer?
Thank you. I do like everything you're talking about, the whole child, especially in a COVID world still, and having been through it, all that. I do have one question about the community providers, and I apologize for not. Are the majority year-round?
So the majority usually have class offer preschool year-round. Our tuition assistance only pays for academic year, with the exception of the June, July, August period that just passed, and the previous one, because we were able to implement an extended learning session to address the COVID disorder. So while they do have classrooms available, many students don't attend if they don't have that tuition assistance support. We do have some that close, traditionally that do that, and they make a great effort to find other opportunities to continue learning for students. So I think what we heard from parents and providers across the board is being able to have that year-round continuous, not knowing what disruptions may happen because of COVID. If it's a week shutdown, it's a temporary shutdown, it's a minor exposure shutdown, really make the difference. And for us, what we saw is huge numbers jump in enrollment. For last summer, we had probably 340 students enrolled. This year, we had close to 500. And parents said that continuity of education, staying at the site where they stayed for the summer, rather than having to move from one preschool to the other, was very good.
Yeah, I think that'd be an interesting cohort, the ones that are able to go year-round, their readiness compared. Because I will say, I think there is such a reboot, just me looking at my own and the kids around them. And at least we got that gap really close with our summer scholars. But I was curious about the community providers going year-round, if we could measure kind of the difference.
We actually do have some data on that question specifically. So we looked at the cohort that was able to have that continuous learning versus those who pretty much had the 9-month learning. They weren't able to extend through that period. And I believe it was a 5.6% percentage point difference on the Acadians reading at or above the benchmark. So we were able to see that with 1 year of data. It's pretty remarkable, I think.
I just want to highlight, I think it's really awesome measuring the physical piece. It's really interesting, and roping all that into the kindergarten readiness piece as well. And just, I just wanted to kind of put a minute and highlight that. I think that's awesome. And having just picked this little guy up from a preschool promise center, 5-star center, I can tell you that it's working from, yeah, that's right, from personal experience. So thanks for what y'all are doing. But I really like that physical piece. I like to keep tracking all that again, going into kindergarten, that whole child. That's really, thank you.
Yes, I'd just like to comment too as well. I've been happy to see that there's consideration for that include the whole child. And what I'm about to ask is not in here, but just wanted your sort of response. We're not out of COVID, but during the sort of the crux of the COVID year, which was last year, where places had to close and all of that, and now there's lots of talk and consideration and thought being given to the social emotional aspects of kids and the whole child. And I'm curious to know if you have any specific examples of the kinds of things that you were seeing in terms of deficits or learning loss or behaviors or anything from the kids that you all had to spend a little bit of extra time trying to work with.
Thank you for asking that question. I have a lot to share. I will say that at the forefront, what we saw from the parents is that they needed help and support in understanding how to continue to support their child's development. And that is part of the reason that we implemented the Smart Start backpacks, because what parents said is if it looks different when it looks at school, it doesn't work the same. And to make sure that we continue that learning and can reinforce what happens there, we need the same equipment and supplies. Our story is always we do fat crayons, right? You have them at school, you need to have them at home. As we've seen that progress, what providers and parents have also shared with us is very significant behavioral difference. That a child that once had no temper tantrums now does. Didn't protest to eating now does. Who had no problem with potty training and those issues now has some challenges related to that. And both parents and providers have asked us for support, and we are very careful to talk about what may be challenges related to trauma that a child has experienced, disruption and versus a child that truly has behavioral problems. And I have to say a thank you to Interim Superintendent Ahmad, because during our implementation committee meeting, she was very cognizant of saying, we have to be careful to look at what we can do with behavioral modifications and support versus having every kid assessed for a special need and get an IEP, being unnecessarily diagnosed with that or classified with that, and what we see in children as a manifestation of the trauma and the differences that we are. We are very fortunate in that we have early childhood educators who have expertise in this and do look at the whole child and don't just focus on the academic part, but also focus on that social emotional learning part. And so that is probably where we will have the biggest growth and the strongest recommendations in our evaluation over the next. Part of what we've done to start to initiate that, unfortunately, was something that came out of Pittsburgh, and that is the value of music education and that social value of music education and math as well. They started on that pilot program last year. And that for us not only drives that engagement in those features, but also things like attention, right? Also things like parent involvement. So we've started to implement those things that look at the whole child and how to do that. And we're fortunate to have innovations as a partner to say not only do we implement it, but how do we measure it? So that when the evaluation comes next year, we'll be able to share those children that were able to participate in those type of activities, the difference that it has.
Thank you. Mr. Anthony?
Thanks for the chance. Sure, thank you very much for the presentation. And I think this is very, very exciting. I think it sounds really like something to be very, very proud of. I continue to think that the investments the whole community has made in your leadership, high quality preschool, is just one of the most important things to have happened in Cincinnati in the last decade or longer. I really want to say thank you. I wanted to try to recap what I thought I heard as some of the headlines and just make sure I got them right. So if I was reading this correctly, on average, your tuition assistance kindergartners through CPP were higher on kindergarten readiness than the comparison. And then if you drill down and look at kids of color in particular, they're even more likely to be higher on kindergarten readiness than the comparison. And that just sounds great. Full stop. I just wanted to check, make sure. I guess my only stop is like, did I miss something? Because that sounds like a huge, huge thing to celebrate.
We have done proof of concept. What we theorize to work with investments in early childhood education are actually proving.
I think you and your team are just very humble, and on the one hand, I appreciate that. On the other hand, I don't want you to get buried, but I think it's a big deal. And I think it's really, really, really a huge investment. It was a renewed huge investment. It made it feel different for kids. And so I wanted to say thank you.
So thank you for that. And I say that I am so grateful for the mighty team of 7 at the Preschool Promise who makes this happen, because though we saw nationwide up to 30% decreases in preschool enrollment, on our team and among our network, less than 2% drop off in enrollment, we still saw 37 providers who were able to reach quality, and 30 providers who immediately quality were able to enroll students so that they could benefit from that tuition assistance. We had over 10,000 hours that providers participated in coaching to make sure that they had those training and skills and credentials. And we only had 2 providers through the course of the entire year that had any STAR movement that was. And those 2 providers immediately were in coaching programs and are working to get those stars back. And over the course of the pandemic, only 9 community providers closed. And of those 9 community providers, 4 of them closed because it was a multi-site center that was a reduction. And they went to other sites. Others moved either outside of the CPS district or advanced to bigger sites that were home care providers, family child care providers that decided to move to. So we have a lot to brag about. But I think what we brag about most is a picture that we got this morning from a mom who said that she had been struggling to get her daughter in preschool. She had been going back to work. She'd been trying for 3 weeks to do it. And she sent us a picture today of her daughter's first day of school with her Mickey Mouse back. And that's what keeps us going. And so if you wouldn't mind, I'll show you the last. You will see the cover of our annual report. And again, this year we did a digital annual report. And while you have the hard copy, in the digital version, if you page through it, you will be able to see active links to all of the sections of our website that are available. When you click on the stories, you'll actually get to see the voice of the parents benefited from the preschool promise, from the providers who took advantage of it, and importantly, from a kindergarten teacher sharing the difference that they know it makes when they have children that come from preschool promise. And again, we have 80% of parents that, but for the preschool promise, we would not be able to afford or struggle to afford to send our child to preschool. And then we are very proud to say, as you saw from what Dr. Hendrick shared, that on every single one of our markers by tuition parents and their satisfaction, we're at 90%.
Okay.
Yes, I know that it's being talked about at the federal level, with at least one of the stimulus plans, is universal preschool. So, do we have any information on that? I mean, is that something that's going to come through fix? Is it going to come? Will the money that we're getting from our local people get planted? I mean, how do we have any idea how that could work? We got past it, but
So I'll share with you.
yeah, but when I started, 27 people, I mean, we were the only district that had managed kindergarten. So we've really come a long way.
I will shake my magic ball, tell you kind of where we are, what may happen, is that what's currently being considered, that there is a mixed delivery model. Start to talk about solely upper school classroom. As so as of Friday, that was included as a requirement. As you know, many times the appropriation dollars are left to the states to decide. However, it will be dispersed in as late as Monday. The controlling board gave $161 million from OBJFS approval for specific use of funds that came out in March. Right? So we're looking to this infrastructure bill that's being considered and talk about universal preschool. It is important to remember that not only the mixed delivery model, but what we're talking about in terms of, and that it is going to be left to Ohio to determine what that state match is in key cases for child care stabilization, subsidy for parents, and quality improvement. That match is in our government. If they change to an FMAP calculation where the state now has to match it by 36%, that's a big difference. And we can't be sure that the Ohio legislature will say that we have those matching dollars to invest to be able to pull down those federal dollars. So I think we're a significant amount of time will be determined. And not only will that money be available, but then how Ohio will determine we estimate what that looks like. Getting to our providers, which I know about almost 3 years. So we are grateful every day that the preschool promise is there. Our ultimate goal and what we hope most that will be optimistic because people will adopt the concept that preschool is necessary and ready funding will always. But until that happens, we will continue to talk about the impact of that investment after that. I think that was helpful with that.
Any other questions or comments? Well, we thank you again for a wonderful and very helpful and productive report. And just a reminder, I believe that we did agree that on the October 26th date. So it's just a matter of me and your board chairs connecting. So we'll make sure we get that done. But thank you again.
Thank you. We have space reserved. We're happy to host you if you're not away.
Okay.
And we will be ready on the 25th.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Superintendent.
Yes, Ms. Susan Bunty, Assistant Superintendent, will do our health and safety update.
Good afternoon, everyone. So it's nice to see everyone. I am going to share with you a little bit of information about where we stand in the city around COVID and also where we are within our district. And at the conclusion of the presentation, I'll share some updates about our vaccination policy mandate and how we're doing. So on the next slide, you'll see a chart that looks very familiar in terms of school measures for COVID safety. So So right now, for student positives, we are at 1,197. For a number of positive staff cases, 265. And you can see our certificated and civil service staff attendance at the bottom of that chart. Please also note that we have 18 schools that are participating currently in surveillance testing, where consented students are tested on a weekly basis. On the next slide, you can see community trends in terms of the daily cases that are occurring within the city and that 7-day average rate, which is now 38. On the next slide, you can see that the 7-day moving average in terms of where we were. We had a lot of green dots in a row, which was exciting, but now we have that red dot at the end. Fingers crossed those green dots come back for us. On the next slide, community trends comparing Hamilton County versus the city of Cincinnati. The latter part of those curves look very similar. Right now, the city is doing work in similar positions. And for community trends in terms of testing on the next slide, you can tell that we are still doing very well in terms of citywide on that average return date for testing. In terms of our vaccination policy update on the next slide, we have 82% of our employees have submitted information into the online portal. Of those, of the 82% who've submitted, 88% are vaccinated, 12% are participating in weekly testing. Something I think that is very exciting is that 324 people have received the vaccine since mid-August. So presumably, perhaps because of the policy. On the next slide, you can see our cadence for communication. So every other day, our employees have received robocalls reminding to submit their information. They've also received auto-generated emails that they have not yet submitted that come to them individually. Yesterday, lists were provided to supervisors, not by status, but by name, of individuals who have not yet submitted. That information is also being provided to supervisors again as we speak, and then will be provided tomorrow as well. Just a reminder that everything is due into the online portal system by 2 p.m. on Friday. What support have we provided to employees to make sure that they're able to comply with the vaccination mandate? We had, as you all know, a vaccination clinic on September 25th. In addition, we opened another vaccination clinic on October 2nd, and we had employees participate in that one. Our employee care center, located next door to this room, is open and has supported many people in helping to scan and submit their documents into the system. Starting tomorrow, we have on-the-ground support for our facility staff. We have folks going over with laptops and people who are going to help folks actually work through the process. And we also have individuals going out to support our schools who may need additional support around submission. And finally, we've had office hours 3 times a week for principals where they can ask questions about how to support their employees and what we can do to better support. So this completes the health and safety update. I'm happy to.
Board members have questions or comments? Mr. Messer and Ms. Spencer.
I have to say I've been a little bit surprised. People in the community have said, I bet you've heard a whole lot from staff and their opinions about that. Frankly, I haven't seen a whole lot. And we've heard a lot more from staff on other topics from staff. So that's good. But I'm just curious if you're hearing anything different on your end. Through your channels in feedback.
We've had a few comments, but not very many, truthfully. I think most people are They understand what the policy is, I think, because there are different choices of being able to submit, whether you're vaccinated or you're participating in weekly testing. I think most people are amenable to.
Bowers?
Yes, I would just like to say that I was happy that the Employee Care Center or the IT department helped me input my information. And I saw the paper, I thought, I'm done, I got no response, I'm good. But it was very, very, it can be a little complicated, so I'm glad that we have on the ground support and I'm excited to see our numbers of people inputting. And I'm hopeful that we'll have a either way.
Well, within the last half hour, we just got 84 more. So we are constantly watching those numbers. Yes.
Thanks, President Jones. I'm going to just acknowledge that I got vaccinated way forever ago. And also got a nice reminder on my desk that I still need to turn in. So I call the customer care center too.
Actually, we'll do it if you just.
If you fill this out.
I'll do that before I leave this room. I get my vaccine card and my wallet. Honest about where I'm not. Really appreciate you. I had a couple of questions that were COVID related, but they're a little bit different from the things you mentioned. I'll just ask a couple of them if that's okay. If it's too off topic, we can get them some other time. I think the first one was about what is or isn't different this winter sports season with Delta and our COVID policies. This is a topic I don't know anything about, but have gotten some questions about it. We wanted to hear a little bit about, do we have the same policies as last year for sports? Have we changed them? Given how Delta is different and not different, what gives us confidence that the policies we have are the right ones? Could you talk about that just a little bit?
So far we haven't changed anything, but as you know, we meet on a regular basis with Cincinnati Health Department and Children, and also we get input from Josh Harden and so we are watching very carefully our athletic teams and we'll change.
So that we've got nothing from the health department or from Children's that says, given Delta, we should do things different.
Not yet.
Okay. We've asked, I have to imagine they would have brought it up.
We have pretty robust conversations.
Yeah. Okay. So it's safe to assume that the health department, with the policies we currently have.
So I try not to speak for other organizations,
sure.
But
that they've told us about.
Yes, exactly. And so, but know that with anything COVID, everything likely to change. And I'm just going to be very transparent about that. So as we learn more, we make decisions. The data.
That's great. I think the second one, there were three of these. The second one was, I think I've also gotten some questions from parents about when does CPS close a classroom? When do we not? When do we close a school? When do we? I feel like I've gotten really good answers from you all when I've asked. I just thought we might take a minute to communicate that to everybody. Like, as I understand it, you all are in very close contact with the health department, looking at a whole range of information, including contact tracing.
Yes.
And we're working with them on a case-by-case basis to close only when necessary.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, so we've made a huge decision to remain open, and we are doing everything we absolutely can to do that. And so saying that is, how do we mitigate against that? So there have been classroom closures, as you all know. When we decide to make a classroom or decide to move a classroom, that decision is made around a multitude of factors, including the number of students who are positive in the classroom, the number of students who are probable, and the number of students who are close contact. And those decisions are made either at the 7:30 a.m. phone call or at the 4 o'clock afternoon. phone calls, so those are reviewed twice each day. We tried really hard to make sure that if there is a classroom closure decision, that information is communicated to families at dismissal time or prior to that, so that we are not moving students to distance learning after that dismissal time. So those decisions, as you said, are made in conjunction with the health department. There's epidemiologists on the phone and are on those calls and who are actively participating and looking at the data from.
It sounds like it's not like there's one ironclad rule.
There is
to
not.
use. It's like a totality of the circumstances idea with medical experts closing only.
Yes.
And I think my last one was just on the, I apologize because I wasn't at the part of the last meeting where we did the minutes policy committee meeting. So this may have come up, but just around the idea of student vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't reported that yet. We haven't reported that yet. Okay. So this may be premature. I was just curious. I think what I'll do is I have some thoughts and questions on that, but if we're going to talk about it, I'll just wait. Thank you.
So were you thinking about student vaccines in terms of are we administering student vaccines or?
No, just I think
in terms of okay.
hearing very strong opinions on both sides around what we do with acquiring vaccines. I had some questions, but we'll talk about Monday. I don't want to jump in. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Bolton.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm not a person that likes to do half full, half empty usually. I'm usually a half full person at least. So we're saying that 82% of all our 6,000 or so folks have done what they were required to do so far, and more are doing it, which is great. Is there any insight about employee? Do we have the specifics regarding employee group? And I don't need to know, but I mean, I think it's great to be able to follow that because I don't know about anybody else, but some folks that are involved with all of this, not in our district, but other organizations that are contemplating this are asking us certain questions about how is it going. And it's great that we're keeping that kind of tally. Maybe you should share it. I don't know, but I think people are watching what we do.
I would maybe if you have it, please share it.
Yeah, so right now by union group, the unions with the highest rate of outstanding submission include AFSCME at 26%, CFT, so those are still the folks who need to submit. So 26% of their organization needs to submit, and CFT is at 18%, trades at 17%, and IUOE is at 6%. So we are monitoring, yes, by collective bargaining.
Great. To follow up on what Ben was saying regarding athletics, I know we get calls too about performance groups.
Yeah.
What are the new rules regarding, or the new practices regarding choirs and dance groups and those sorts of folks, as well as other activities? Who's watching that?
Yeah, so we are paying attention to that as well. So again, nothing has changed since in recent times, but we are paying attention, particularly as was mentioned, as we move more folks in. So we are watching those numbers.
Do we think that there's going to be more leniency for the parents of performers or whatever? Because I think there makes a big comparison for volleyball's inside or what,
Yeah.
So I know it's also a audience thing, and that the audience piece is different for a theater or a small theater or choir room or what have you.
So right now we're at audience participation at 25% capacity.
Okay.
So that's everything. And will unless data changes. So if it changes for the better, we can increase. If it changes for the worse, then right now we're still at 25%.
Thanks. And the kids are allowed to be performing or participating in those sorts of. Great. One last question about you make the determination, rightfully so, about a combination of factors, and you have to be flexible about that. You might the sorts of students that are impacted,
Yes.
or the size of the classroom, or there's all those things that are going. But always, is it within the policies that we have as a board regarding when we shut down, meaning, there is policy that certain conditions have to be made or met for us to say, hey, the flu is so bad, we've got to close this building, or the flu is so bad, we have to close this classroom. Is that what, are you looking at that policy as well, so that you all have more cover? Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Thank you, Ms. Bunty. I will just say, I want to commend the work of the policy committee. I really do believe that this is a solid policy that we have on piece. And it does give people options. And so very appreciative of that. And I think that's indicative based on what you're telling us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Final presentation, Ms. Amat.
I just want to take a brief moment to acknowledge Susan Bunty and Van Horn for implementing the policy and putting all of the supports, data system in place to ensure that we've implemented with fidelity, and they just done a phenomenal job, so thank you. So, Rob, the transportation update, presentation, thank you. You have a slide deck on the transportation update, and also, this is from Vision Zero, the work that we've done on pedestrian safety. So I just wanted to before I go into the presentation, to bring this to mind because it's aligned to our work on safety in our community. And so we received this from Mel McVeigh, Senior City Planner. So all of the actions that were followed around updating signage, striping crosswalks, bump outs, and it gives you specific areas and where did that funding come from. So that's there for you. And then I'll jump into our presentation. Next slide, please. This presentation, I will be joined later by the Interim Director of Transportation, Lenise Fulton, and so excited to introduce Doug Palmer, OSBA Transportation Consultant, and we have very specific topics that we want to share with you. I'm going to start by giving an update on the CPS sorter meeting. Next slide, please. This meeting was held October 1st at 1:30. CPS attendees was myself and board member Ms. E. Bolton, and the SORTA attendees was board chair Craig Kesey, board member Brendan Cole, and CEO Darrell Haley. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to give you a summary of that meeting. CPS shared that families and principals continue to be concerned about the length of bus rides and timeliness of arrivals. SORTA agreed to meet with schools and families. CPS inquired about the length of time on the bus, the number of transfers, bus passing students, passing them up and not showing up at bus sites location, the current design of the routes to ensure that kids arrive on time, and the ability to improve those routes. CPS asked several clarifying questions, including charter private school students getting to school, definitions of unique riders, and unique students and eligible students. SORTA indicated that they would not restore routes this academic year and continues to have challenges regarding recruiting bus drivers. CPS is researching a yellow bus option for 7th and 8th graders, and you will hear a little more about that later on in this presentation. As far as next steps, CPS will continue to share data with SORTA regarding late arrivals and dismissals, long bus rides being more than an hour, so they can problem solve.
SORTA agreed to meet with families at high school to discuss routes that are longer than they should be and share correct route information. SORTA will send a letter to families to clarify correct routes. And then I requested that SORTA email me directly the daily ridership of each student and how long they will be on the bus, as well as a list of students with no transfers, one transfer, and more than one transfer. So I'm going to pause here before having Ms. Buchwald come up, and then also allow board member Bolton if you want to share anything as well, or if you have any questions before we continue on with the presentation.
I think it was very complete, appreciate it. It was an interesting meeting. The real mover and shaker there was one of their board members, and you know who that is. I think Mr. Kelly was tried to be very helpful. We did ask about how are the charter kids and the parochial kids getting to school because of the information we've been getting, even though we're part of that effort. There seems to be a tremendous decrease, at least from the charts that we've had over the last several years, let alone any extra routes. So I think that is something to follow up. And I do think the board needs to know a little bit more, since I can't keep track of it, and help me out. This is, if I may ask a question, the idea of eligible students. You have enrollment, that's everybody. But eligibility is whether it's elementary or whether it's high school. Is that 1 mile?
One and one fourth.
1 1/4 mile for high school and for elementary, or is it elementary 1?
Elementary.
Yeah.
1 mile for elementary.
Okay, elementary would take us to certainly the K6 and even some of our K8 buildings. I think high school would be the 9 to 12. At any rate, the eligibility thing is crucial because we have the soon to be, finance has seen it a little bit, is the dot makeup of where our kids are. And it is fascinating as to really to look at how far our kids are away from. I know Ryan's really been fascinated by it. It's remarkable. But also the cluster of really how many of our kids actually do live so close that if we really did, develop some sort of a walking system, it might be a little bit. But then the piece that I need clarity on is when Metro talks about riders or students, and when they show us these charts, and I've talked a little bit about this. If there's 2,000 kids in the afternoon and there's 2,000 in the morning, and Jen told me that generally there's more in the afternoon than in the morning, and that looks true. Are those the same kids? Because sometimes the numbers we get, they say we have 4,000 kids attending or 4,000 kids riding. The reality is that depending upon how they define the riders or the unique students or whatever.
So we've met, if you could, Connie Solano and the school call with Darryl directly.
Right.
So he's going to provide all that information to us next week. Said it is going to take some time to sort. We asked very targeted, specific questions. He needed more time and wasn't able to do it for this week, but he's going to provide that information next week.
And the other interesting thing that he said, which we were kind of both stunned at, was that the numbers we had at the last cow or whatever, the mid-September, it was like 4,400 or something, and it looked like it was a big decline. He said in this meeting that we're back at where we were pre-COVID.
Yes, I believe he said roughly, and that the ridership has went out. So it almost doubled. So that's why we asked for those reports, and he's going to send them, and I have requested that they come to me directly, and he's going to start sending them.
That's great. That's really good that it's going to go there. directly. And then my baseline is the request that Ben made right before Mr. Johnson left. That's the baseline as we need to look at it for pre-COVID. And some of those numbers may or may not jive. So I think if the more we can create our own data and verify and validate, I think the better. But they're not restoring the routes that the superintendent has said, and we have to start figuring out what our next steps are largely.
Thank you. So the next portion of our presentation is.
So thank you for having me this afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in transportation. Next slide, please. All right, first thing is that we are diligently working to find a transportation director. We have posted this position on LinkedIn, on the district webpage, the Ohio People Transportation Association, the National People Transportation Association, and the Ohio School Board Association job board. We are currently reviewing, we only have like 4 at this point applications, but we're hoping to get more, and we want to make sure we're not just putting it on one. We want to make sure we find the right person to lead this work. If it's been just in my month and a half, couple weeks, I've realized it takes a very talented, committed person. So the district and the kids and the families. So we are looking and working hard to find that. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yellow Bus RFP. We are going to be looking at a 5-year, possible 2-year renewal of the vendor contracts. So we submitted a proposed RFP. It's being reviewed, and on October 21st, with the possible post date of October 25th. We will hold pre-bid meetings scheduled for November 4th. RFP is due on November 12th, 2021, and we will do a peer evaluation of RFP results. After the evaluation process by November 17th. We estimate submission date to the board of our findings by the next. One of the goals of our department is on-time performance. This chart will show you that we've had a little bit of rocky road in that area. Our goal is 90% on-time. This is from the first week of school until 6th week of school. And we were doing a little bit better. We had a dip with the power outage and the rainy week, but we are back up to 79%. But that's not acceptable. We're working closely with our vendors. But the goal is to have our kids to and from school on time and safely. So 80% is the action. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Doug Palmer, who's going to present the information that we have researched about yellow bus service.
I too have had the pleasure to work with your district. And I want to say that you have very committed, hardworking, ambitious, and people with vision in that transportation department. And I want to commend them for all of their efforts and all of the work that they're doing. When we listen to the board and request to look at establishing yellow bus service for 7th and 8th graders, we have a lot of work to do. It takes a lot of work. There's a lot of detail. There's a lot that goes into it. One of the first steps is that you need to establish ridership estimates. We have established a ridership estimate using the statistical method of 65% of the ADM. And luckily, or good, your ADM has actually gone up from the data I was looking at in 2019. Got the new data. So this year, it's up over 100 students in those 2 grades. So that's really good. When we look at the statistical average of 65% as bus riders, Now, that won't always hold true in every case, but it's a very good baseline to work off of. I find it's very, very accurate. That will show in the slides of bus riders and number of buses needed. The other, we have to identify what schools we can link together. So if we run a first tier bus, what school can we link to the second route? What school can we do for the second route? That's being identified. But there's also a distance. If one school gets an anchor time of an early school on the east side, but we have a west side school that needs the second tier, that deadhead time eliminates that route. So there's a lot of investigation going on, identifying what possible routes to link together. We are also, and that's part of the next step, is analyzing the school anchor times and locations. We need to figure out where they're at, how they work together, just to make it efficient so the buses can operate and use the capacity that the buses have. We are also currently talking with the vendors and trying to find out what level of service they feel comfortable committing to. Everyone is in a bus driver shortage. I'll share with you that there was a school district in Georgia today that just reported nationally that they are 80 drivers short of having their routes covered every day. They have 4 applicants in the process of being hired. So this driver shortage is not just in Cincinnati. It's not just what's happening right here in Ohio. It is national. So if we look at the estimated ridership, what I've done is taken 65% of the grade 7th and 8th and broken that down by school. And the chart and the graph identifies the bus riders that the 65% statistical number should cover. Are any questions or before we go on to the next slide? Yes.
Let's go.
Does it, I mean, we've read, I mean, you're published in the OSBA management stuff, so we are pleased that you're here helping us. Does it, since we have so many choices, the magnet mix and the neighborhood mix and the Montessori mix and this whatever, how does that impact the aggregate of the 65% or whatever?
We're
How do you
using
do that?
the 65% as the baseline.
Okay.
And those eligibilities and those requirements and those choices will then have to be determined individually for each school as we go along.
Okay.
And so we're not using one baseline and saying that works everywhere. This is the amount of work that's very hard to explain what's going to have to happen in your district to make sure that we don't upset the apple cart. You know, we really need to make sure that every step we take doesn't undo something that's being done now. So this is the work. This is it's a timely, exhaustive work to look at every detail, and that's what we're working through. And that's why I say the ambition and drive and vision of your staff encourages me that they're going to do a fantastic job. So but each one, that's why there is not just one slide. That's why every school is broken down, because everything's going to have to be determined on what can be done for that school, how it works, the route times, everything's going to have to work together to make it possible. So.
I think that reassures the public too, that the individualization of each of the schools for sure. And actually in our other efforts, knowing this, the way you're analyzing it, will help us also make other plans. It will be interesting to see what, the ridership or whatever differs from the magnet to the neighborhood to the Montessori as we go further into wherever we're going into the future.
Yeah. Mr. Morosky is going to ask a question, and after his question, I'm going to ask that you go ahead and finish your presentation just for time's sake, and then we can ask our questions at the end. Go ahead.
Mine's super quick. Thanks so much for both of being here and helping out crack this code. But I was just hoping for the edification of the public who are watching. Anchor time and deadhead time.
Well, the anchor time is what time the school starts. The deadhead time is when that bus gets empty, how long does it take to get to the next part of this route, whether it's picking up students or dropping students off in the afternoon. So that's dead time is the time the bus spends going from one portion of the route to the other.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we look at the number of buses needed for each school district or for each school building, and it varies according to the need of the number of students. But to have a good number to work off of, it looks like 32 is the average number of riders going to be on the bus. Now, some buses will be heavy and some buses will be light, but an average of 32 riders per bus is the best case scenario. I say best case scenario because as we get into the data and we look at each individual school, it may take more buses at one school than another, just for the distance that has to be covered. The driving locations, the routes, the paths away from school, all of the traffic that impacts the bus, just like it impacts parents when they come to pick up their students, all that impacts student travel time on buses too. So we have to be very careful that we get the right scenario done for each building. It's not just one size fits all. Well, that's kind of what we're doing right now. We're looking at this big thing through a microscope. So adding this yellow bus service to the your district is not cheap. It's not inexpensive. Under the current rate structure for yellow busing, we're putting out a new RFP as we speak earlier. But right now, the estimated daily cost of adding this bus service for every student using 32 buses per school building on routes, linked or unlinked, singles, or the way it's going to work, we estimate the cost would be $15,250 every day. Monthly cost is over $300,000, and annual cost is nearly $3 million. That's an additional cost. That's not the base cost with Metro and everything else. This is additional cost. What's interesting, though, is by doing the comparison, we are very used to understanding cost per student, and the cost per student would be estimated at $1,130. At the ridership level, using 32 buses as a capacity, we're estimating that the cost per student would be $1,130. State average is $1,077. So it's a little more, but it's not tremendously more. Now that's the estimates. If we have specific areas that a district is going to need more buses because we need more time, that cost per student is going to go up because there'll be fewer students on the buses. So the next steps, continue studying the bell structures. We're trying to find linkable routes and locations. We're looking at how adding buses and capacity, what does that change and what does that do? We still will need to look at determining your ridership eligibility for your yellow buses. And we will need to communicate all of our findings as we go along to all of our stakeholders. I guess that's it. I guess the next slide is questions.
Open for questions or comments. Ms. Bowers.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Palmer, for that information. My back started hurting a little bit when I was looking at the cost and then all these buses. Just a little bit of started hurting. But nevertheless, I'm thinking about Ms. Bolton's map about how spread out our kids are in our district. And this, I heard her say Montessori neighborhood, but I'm thinking high school choices. This is what this is really for. So I'm not thinking elementary. I'm thinking high school is what this is for, and how spread out all of our kids are around the whole city. And it makes me cringe just a little bit thinking about the time they're going to spend from going from one side of the city to the other. And I'm glad to hear you say we have to be cognizant that we don't want to upset the apple cart.
That's right.
Will this travel be even more than what they're doing now on Metro, which I know you said you're carefully looking at that. And so the percentage of the ridership, I guess that's going to come back to when you get the information from Metro to see riding what and how often is going to help you with your ridership amount. And then I'm thinking of the increased number of students we get every year, because when our enrollment goes up. And the question I have is, and might be for administration, or you might give it back to us, is this something that we're looking at for ongoing, regardless of what happens with Metro next school year, or are we looking at this year?
We were specifically looking at this year because it was a board assignment to look specifically at 7th and 8th. Initially, when we had the meeting with Metro, I posed the question to them of doing extra routes solely for 7th and 8th graders. They said they were unable to do it. So then we went back to see what we could do for yellow buses. We're in this situation because of the elimination of the extra bus routes. So we was just looking for this year.
Okay, and then the second part, President, if you would allow me, Ms. Wagner, how much of an impact is this going to have on us? I know we were supposed to be saving money from what the Metro was doing, but I think that kind of got swallowed up with what we're doing with staff and extra time. So how much of an impact does this have on our budget if this actually gets pulled off?
Based on the information I saw tonight, this ad would exceed the savings that we thought we were going to have with Metro. I don't know what the new savings would be if we haven't seen that data.
Okay, so we have several questions. Mr. Lindy first, followed by Ms. Bates, and followed by Mr. Messer.
Thanks, President Jones. Ken was asking, I think, exactly the question I was trying to ask about money saved versus this, but the numbers I'm remembering are different from what you just said, Jen, and I may be confused. I thought we were, like we had been paying Metro something like $10 million.
$8 billion. It's about $8 billion a year average.
And the ridership looked like it was about half of what we had been. Or like when we looked in a recent meeting, ridership was about half. So wouldn't that take it to 4? Wouldn't we be saving $4 million?
We have to wait. That's why we're asking for that report from Metro, because now they're saying it went up. Of course, to 8,000. Right. So I'm waiting for that report next week.
Right. That feels important. Yeah. Okay.
I think what you're saying, though, that all of this is going to have budgetary impact anyway. I mean, whatever. So the data, whatever data we gather, which we continue to say that's important to what informing us is going to matter. And so, like Jen, it's hard for Jen to kind of project out what the savings is without knowing all of the pieces of it. So,
absolutely. What seems so interesting is it could cut either way. This could actually create savings to do this, or it could be an even bigger mess than we thought it was going to be. We just don't know yet.
We just don't know.
The other question I wanted to ask, I'm happy to do later, but it was about the meeting with the city. It wasn't about the presentation.
Ask your question.
Well, I appreciated Eve's questions. I am still, I think, really confused about how to feel about what's happening with the elimination of the extra routes. Because, like, on the one hand, we hear things, I think, from SORTA that things are better, that ridership is up, down. I also, I'm hearing from fewer parents than I was hearing from a couple weeks ago. I don't know if that's because people are so depressed that they gave up, or if it's because it's actually getting better. I also know that when I was asking, and we got this report from Sarah with all this information from Metro, but it was exclusively information about this year. And what was missing was, what do we compare it to? Like, is there all of this interesting stuff, is that better or worse than? And so I think the thing I'm trying to understand, looking at Tiana, because I'm interested in your take on this, is like, how should we feel about how things are going? Are we still unclear? Is it extremely bad? Is it much better?
I think where we stand right now, we really, and to Mr. Palmer's point, it's because of the dedication of our staff who stepped up and have gone beyond. And right now, I'm talking about the school staff. Of staying before and after school to ensure the safety of our kids. The partnership, the memo that I just gave you, and I think it was also emailed on the city's role on trying to make it safer for pedestrians. So that part, it's a little better. However, I think you are hearing less complaints because parents are driving. That's why that ridership is so important. So based on what Sarah has given the board and has given administration, it dropped by half. But in our meeting on October 1st, they said it doubled, and then in administrative meeting with Metro, he said he will give me the report next week. So that report will tell us a lot. So I think parents have elected to, what I can assume right now, have elected to find other options to get their child to school if they had the resource to do that.
Yeah.
As far as the safety, we're doing everything in our power. And that's what CPS does, right? We step up every time. We take the responsibility of safety and educating kids very seriously. So it really has been the personnel who really put in the work to ensure the safety under these hard conditions.
I agree. And I think that nothing but gratitude and appreciation of our staff. The thing I keep thinking about is, I agree with you. This data is really important. It seems to me that it's entirely possible that this is still a huge disaster that I think was imposed on us from the outside. And I just don't want to, I don't want that to, I don't want the heat to go away, you know? And I think like if it's, I feel very strongly that the burden of proof should be on SORTA. Like they changed it. They should be able to prove to us that it is better. And if they can't, that says to me that it's worse. And I think that we should be calling for significant changes at Metro in leadership, like if they can't prove that. So there's a lot of gratitude, I think, for you and for our team. I just wanted to offer my support for like not letting people off the hook if they haven't shown us that it is actually better.
And I think that was the importance of the October 1st meeting. They were very clear that they were not going to restore the route, and they were very clear that there's a shortage of bus drivers, and that has not improved. So we got clear.
The kids be the ones who have to bear the blame. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. Well, the answer to Ben's issue is there's no accountability for SORTA. And I don't know why this isn't an issue in the council and mayoral, debates. It is in the school board debates. It's like, well, what are these candidates going to do if we can't do anything? What are they going to do? I mean, it's really, the county and the city that makes the appointment. And that's not been an issue. And, perhaps that's something we need to personally, those of us who aren't running or even those who are running to raise as an issue, because there is no accountability. Anyway, I'm not sure if you're able to compile this yet, but, attendance numbers, high school and junior high numbers down because of lack of transportation. Do we have that yet? You don't have to, give it to us this evening, but we would like to have that to demonstrate whether or not this is working. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line of showing up. And again, here we are investigating busing for 7th and 8th graders on yellow buses. They can't if there's a bus driver shortage, what makes us think we're going to get bus drivers for the 7th and 8th graders? I mean, we're not, we can talk about numbers, but we're probably not going to be able to do this if there aren't bus drivers. And apparently there aren't. That's why we don't have the extra routes, correct?
We have been in conversations with our yellow bus services, and I'm sure you've seen the signs for the yellow bus service. They have really been actively recruiting. I'm not for sure, but I do believe they may even pay more. They can pay more. They also have a signing bonus. So they have shared with us that they could support that if the board is willing to do that. But we have a lot of work to do before saying this is definitely the way to go. We wanted to give you the cost and the process of what we still need to do to make that work. But they're a little different than
So
Metro.
our vendors can get the bus drivers, but sort of can't get.
Okay, so for the sake of time, I mean, you're
No, I'm
going to
done.
take it, okay, well taken. And I think one of the things, I got you, we still have Mr. Messer and then Mr. And I did invite you if you wanted to have your seat, if it didn't, okay.
I'm fine standing here.
Okay, great.
I feel better standing.
Yeah,
I can exit more quickly.
I think the points that are being made are talked about. I think we took a position, we've made it clear, and we've given clear directive to administration about what information and what data is needed for our position. I think it's okay to hold, I think we should hold sort of accountable. And we wanted to hear them say again, we can't do these routes, and have them demonstrate their position around this. And then we have to strategically decide how we approach that. And so I think that's what everybody is speaking to. So I'm trying to get around everybody because we're getting close to ending. So I wanted to make sure that we summarize that. So your point is well taken. Mr. Messer, did you have a point?
Yeah, this was just a comment just to make sure we're following this one, because I don't know if it was health and safety or finance, but we had that review of attendance. Wasn't that health and safety? Maybe? It was one of those meetings. In any event, there was a, we're kind of looking, trying to see if there were trends, and there was one trend that really evident, and that was where we had closer in, attendance was much greater. Sounds obvious, but I think it was an aha because everybody was trying to see that we had some significant attendance challenges. But then when you look where the dots are so close, these were the shining stars of really rock star attendance. So there's a definite benefit if kids can't learn if they're not in school, to try to get them closer to the schoolhouse.
Mr. Ross.
This is probably a dumb question, so I apologize. I've seen the RFP in the yellow bus in 7th, 8th, 7th, 8th, and we're talking about when we go to the RFP and all this data and everything. We're talking about scrapping Metro entirely, correct? Unless somebody chooses.
There's two separate issues. Yellow bus is for the elementary.
So we're not talking about yellow bus for high school.
No, we're talking yellow bus for elementary for the RFP.
And that's for, is there anything stopping us from issuing an RFP for everything?
No, there's not. The question is to the board, do you want to put all kids on yellow bus?
I do.
Service? Okay.
I'm just one guy, though. I'm just one person. I'm just one guy.
Yeah. But that's a point well taken that I think from a strategic standpoint, when we see the data, we need to decide.
Yeah.
Permanently one way or the other. Okay. Anything else, Mr.
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, one last question before we adjourn.
Very quickly. Palmer's focusing mostly on the yellow bus.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's the Metro piece. I'm very concerned about anybody doing an RFP anytime this month. We don't know what we're doing yet. That's my concern, because it sounds like we're going to be redesigning what it is that we're doing when you even pull in the high school piece of the 7th and 8th graders. So I would hope that we would be able to delay that for a couple of weeks until, I know the board's going to have a fact finding when the administration has more data to share with us, and then we have to start thinking about the future, but that can be delayed for a couple of weeks.
I'm glad you brought that up because we had that conversation in our meeting as well, as far as trying to make sure we have the service and trying to meet the deadline. So if it's the will of the board, we can email you a new timeline. And then if you can give us direction on if you want to continue K-12 busing on the yellow services. So we will update the timeline.
So one answer also, wrote the RFP, that it would include expanding their services. So it added a second link to routes. So there could be, instead of just 2 routes linked, there could be 3 routes linked. So that is in the RFP already. It is something that is flexible enough that we can do it without doing a new RFP.
I just think we'd all feel more comfortable if we actually knew what we were doing. Total, I mean, the experts know what to do, and you've got it. So I'm just, that might be better after our fact finding or whatever.
Yes, I was just going to say, maybe we shouldn't issue the RFP before the fact finding. Let's do the
That's
fact
good.
finding first.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about the presentation? Wonderful job, good presentation, lots of good questions and comments, lots to think about. Okay, I think that concludes our agenda for the committee of the whole. I need a motion to recess into executive session to consider employment of a public employee or official. Should be fairly short. I need a motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is this a voice or a roll?
Roll call.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Page?
Aye.
Walter?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Yes.
Mr. Lindsey?
Yes.
Mr. Messer?
Yes.
Mr. Malachie?
Yeah.
President Jones?
Yes.